I really want to start by saying congratulations on the movie. I thought you did such a great job with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Pleasure to be here. It's very interesting times. All of these connections now are they're through cyberspace. It's Zoom or Skype or FaceTime. It's crazy not to be there in person.
Yeah, this is what I've been doing a lot of, and it's definitely bizarre. So before I get started, first, I know you worked with David Leitch a few times with, on Atomic Blonde and Deadpool, and so he said, I was told to ask you if you remembers the first one.
I mean, I remember the first time I worked with them. I don't know if he counts it, but for me, it was Chad and Dave directing Second Unit on reshoots for Street Fighter. That was the first time I recall. But then, the first time I think they gave me responsibility was the mechanic hired me as a fight choreographer. His recollection may be different, but.
No, I think he was probably trying to have you talk about Street Fighter or something like that,
Yeah.
So I definitely, before we get into Extraction, I definitely want to jump backwards a little bit and talk about how in the last few years you've worked with Russo Brothers as Second Unit Director and Stunt Coordinator on Avengers. Well, I believe you did Civil War, and then Infinity War and Endgame. So I definitely want to touch on what was it like working with them. And because those three films, the action, everything about those movies is incredible. So if you could just talk a little bit about working with them and the experience of, those films.
Yeah. I actually first met the Russo brothers in 2013 when we were shooting Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I was the stunt double for Captain America, and they were directing their first big, action movie for the Marvel Universe. And in that film, I got on well with them, and I didn't have the kind of responsibility that I would have later. But I think we made a connection, and they saw kind of my passion for filmmaking and love of action. And then they asked me to come coordinate Captain America: Civil War. And on that movie, I was doubling and coordinating. So I spent a lot of time with them in even the writing room. We were writing action sequences, and the script was there, but we wanted to delve deeper into these characters and these sequences. And we spent a lot of time with things on the page, and then I would run off and do what they called a fight viz. So we'd shoot and cut. The stunt team and I shoot and cut action sequences and design fights, and then take them back to the Russos, and they would go like, I think, Cap should do a little more of this, or they would have their input. And so we changed things. And it was actually through that process that I learned a lot from them as a director, because I worked with Chad, I worked with, Dave, and and even Francis Lawrence used those fight vises to better their own movie. But for me, I was using that as directing practice. I would do my version of the scene, take it to these really great directors and get their feedback, and then I would be secretly making notes of how to make my future movies better. And so my relationship with the Russos developed, and then Infinity War and Endgame came along, and I just can't say enough good things about those two and how they pull you in and make you feel like family, and they're super supportive and always looking out for their friends and family, and trying to help and mentor and just be collaborative filmmakers.
Since you did Second Unit on those three films, what might be something that fans would be surprised to learn that you filmed?
Well, I think the biggest responsibility I was given was on Endgame, and you might be surprised that I filmed the kind of entirety of the Cap versus Cap fight. I filmed the more surprising was the death scene of Nebula when they're in the tunnel after Hawkeye has been fighting all of the creatures, and there's a little standoff there. I filmed that entire sequence. So they gave me a lot of responsibility on that movie, because there was so many things to be shot. But I also believe, because it was Infinity War when they asked me to do Extraction. And so when Endgame, I went away, scouted in the interim between those movies. We shot them back to back. Went away and scouted. When I came back, I get a lot more responsibility and doing a lot more even dramatic scenes where they wouldn't even show up. I mean, Joe would come in, spend 10 minutes behind the monitor and he'd look and be like, man, you're doing great, and he'd leave. Where I'm doing a death scene of a major character in the Marvel Universe. And I was kind of, very much excited to do it, but a little also surprised with, all that's riding on these movies, and they would just take off and they'd be directing other things. And so you probably, I would say that'd be one of the biggest surprises, that I get to direct the death scene of, a Marvel character, and they were nowhere to be seen. They were always watching, like they had a feed to their stage, but they weren't there physically.
Yeah, I heard about they were always watching everything. Technology.
Oh yeah. Yep, they would, whether it was, a hardline feed or somebody, when you'd go on a set, would film the monitor and text it back to them, or airdrop it or whatever. They were always just keeping tabs on things, which is great. And you want to, I respect that. It's their film, their process, and they want their vision to be realized. And I tried very hard to make it so that you couldn't really tell where the Russos, stopped and where Sam Hargrave began. So it was one fluid movie going experience. I didn't want, I might have my own style, but I didn't want to put that into their movie. My job as a second unit director is to support the director. And so I just wanted it to be, their vision.
Do you think that Extraction, like Infinity War and Endgame, as you said, must have been a huge learning curve in terms of, those are massive, massive productions. Do you feel like Extraction would have been as good if you had made it before Infinity War? Or do you think those two films sort of really helped you as a director with all that responsibility?
I definitely think if I had made Extraction before working on Infinity War and Endgame, it would have been a very different movie. And I think that the experience I gained from those two films and the responsibility given to me by the Russos, and just even during the process of making it, the advice they gave, and the things I learned technically, both working with actors, and all of those experiences stacked up to, I think, propel me to the place that I was ready. When are you ever ready to direct a movie, really? But I was in a more prepared place to embark on, directing my own feature.
I definitely want to jump backwards to when Netflix. Basically, it's Extraction is an AGBO movie that was, I guess, produced by Netflix. Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah, it was Joe wrote the script, and it was produced by AGBO, and that it was their movie, and Netflix was putting up the money, basically. So they were the producing partner, and they were super supportive. And once we had Hemsworth signed on, once he showed interest, it was, Netflix was very keen to work with him and to work with the Russos. And Joe also he's very in tune with the markets and with the way that business is going. And he'd been saying, for a couple of years, like streaming, he's just saying streaming, that's the way of the future. He's like, streaming is where you want to be. That's where we're going to consume our content. So he's very much wanted to work with Netflix. And I think it was, a very great experience for everybody.
One of the things that, listen, I think that the action in Extraction is fucking awesome. And I love how violent it is at times. And I'm just curious, was there any pushback from Netflix or any sort of guide in terms of how far you could go with some of this action? Or was it sort of like, we trust you guys?
That's a great question and a fun story. We set out to make a very real, very violent, very visceral movie, and it was one of those things where there wasn't really, during the shooting process, Netflix very much left us alone. They were always a phone call away to support, but there was nobody there telling us we need to make the movie. And then, a lot of it, because of time and whatnot, a lot of the blood and kind of the violence of some of these things we were adding afterwards in post, because, it's crazy how I love the way squibs look in certain things, but then there's they're great for, certain things. Other things that are just not quite as real as I wanted them to be. And so we were in post, and there were some passes early on where the movie was much more violent than it is now. And they did have some comments. There was they called it the blood document. And so there were specific notes of like, might want to dial this one back 80%, might want to dial this one back 20, So we did. There was back and forth, give and take, and I think, to their credit, that we ended up somewhere. I say compromise, but somewhere where everyone was comfortable with what we were doing. But it was a fun process. The back and forth, it was great.
So the original title I believe was called DACA, and then it became Extraction.
Correct.
And I wanted to know, was it ever going to be called DACA, or was that like the temp title?
Well, it's funny. That was the script title. That was the working title. I think we all liked the title. It's very unique. But then once you started seeing the reaction to the spoken word DACA, people go, wait, is that Trump immigration thing? And you go, no. So it automatically had a weird initial connotation. And so then the second bit was, you look at it written and people, like, is it Dhaka? Like, most people don't know where that is on a map. Like, it's Dhaka, Bangladesh is not somewhere that in the Western world people talk about every day. So it's not a familiar term. So there's two strikes against it as far as marketability is concerned. We all like the title because, it was the town. It's kind of a character in the movie, or the city, sorry. But, we decided that it wasn't telling people enough about the film, and we just, through marketing and some test audiences and whatnot, we landed on a title that was a little better for the marketing strategies that Netflix had planned.
Sure. Watching the film, one of the things that I loved is how you were filming on these real locations and with all these people in the background, and you can tell some of them are just watching the action, like just standing there. How effing hard was it to make this movie on location?
Probably the biggest hurdle we faced was the location shooting of these big action sequences because of the sheer number of people. And in my history as a stunt performer and as a stunt coordinator, just my upbringing was safety first. Like, you're doing these things, but at the end of the day, everyone needs to go home to their families and be safe. So that's always the number one concern. So when you have a place that is that crowded and that popular, we had times where when we were shooting this, we had 200 to 300 security personnel. It posted up in different doorways and streets, just because if we ran down a 6 to 10 city block run with these cars doing a car chase, you've got men, women, children, dogs, and cattle running around that, that's just their space. And so, we make people aware, but then you don't want in the middle of a car chase someone or something running out and an accident happening. So that was one of just the logistical hurdles that we faced. And, hats off to the AD team for making that happen, because there was never any problems. We always had everything locked up and it was a very safe shoot. But yeah, there were so many people. And like you said, when a lot of the people on the streets, when you're interacting with people or vehicles, those are placed there by us. And, and again, the AD team, and like observing how, when we would just pass through, how people would just stand and watch. And so we were like, what would you do if people were fighting in the middle of the street? They're kind of just watch. And it was, but then if you look up on some of the shots, some of them we took out, but most of them are there. Like, if you look up, usually in windows or on rooftops, you can see people watching, and those weren't ours. Those were people who were just watching, enjoying the live show, and some of them ended up in the movie.
There's a shot of when there's an action set piece or part of the set piece when Chris and the kid are going through that building being chased by the military, and I saw them go out into a thing, and in the background you can see all these people standing there watching, and I'm like, oh, those are just people living there watching this thing being filmed.
100%. 100%. And what was crazy about that sequence is, in between takes, and they were all very respectful. It was amazing. It's not a place where a lot of action films or any kind of films in that town of Ahmedabad were made. And they were very enthralled with what was going on, but very respectful. And it was insane to have, because, those are the people you see in front of the camera. There's, two other sides you don't see. And so there are thousands of people watching this. And, in between takes, when we'd cut and we'd reset, and Chris would walk back down the stairs out into this little, coliseum, the roar of the crowd, the applause was insane. It was as if we were at like a European football match. Like, so you got like the star just goes out and he's just waves his hand and they would go crazy. It was the energy was so infectious that it was, they wanted to take all those people with you to every location so they could keep it fun.
How long was your first cut compared to the finished film?
First cut compared to the finished film. Well, there was an early cut of the film that was about 2 hours and 15 minutes, something like that.
Oh, so it's not that much.
No, it wasn't crazy, but because we always knew, I mean, we shot a lot of footage, but we always knew that it wanted to be about what it ended up. It was just a matter of, the first time you're putting all the scenes in there because you just want to see, all the scenes that are on the page, you shoot them, and sometimes during the course of production, you'll be like, that doesn't work, and you won't shoot the scene. But usually you shoot the script, and then you go back and just see what's working. And some of the scenes, we put it all, so they're all in there, and it runs about 220, a little over 220, and you're like, oh, it's long, and we knew that. And so then you just got to get in there and do the hard work of what scenes have to go. And there were quite a few scenes that whole scenes just had to get lifted and removed. And then we truthfully went back once we had it all kind of down and lean and mean and telling the story we wanted to tell. There were a few places where on the page you can make the leap from one moment. You can fill in the blanks a little easier when you're reading for whatever reason than when it's up on screen. And some people were confused by a few things, so we devised a list of things we needed to go back and add to the story to make it a little more a little more cohesive for the first time viewer.
Sure. Are there what was the last thing that you cut out of the film before you picture locked, and why?
Last thing before we picture locked, and why? There was a version of the scene in the a beautifully written scene in English. The scene where, if you're familiar with the film, where our villain, the kind of the father-son relationship or facsimile of between our villain Amir Asif and the kid that was on the rooftop. They have a scene at a dining room table that when in the original cut was 10 minutes long, and then we whittled it down to maybe 5, and then it was beautiful. There's this story, Amir tells a story about this this girlfriend he used to have. It was very metaphoric and it had like this fun ring to it. It just people watched it, most of the time they were just, a lot of the metaphors and stuff kind of went over their heads, and we're like, do we need all of this? Let's just get to the point and give the advice. And so a 10-minute original scene ended up being, I think it's like maybe 2 minutes. So we just really went in there and chop, and then it says what it needs to say, and it's like kind of a nice moment. The most important thing in that scene was the relationship and connection between the two characters, and what was said, although poetic, didn't really need it in the final product. So we just got to the meat of it and got rid of the rest.
So Joe Russo wrote the script, and I'm just curious. Mm-hmm. He obviously has a lot of experience on a lot of movies and TV. How is it scripted for some of these action set pieces? Is it sort of like on the page? Is it saying, a massive car chase ensues, and then you're turning that into that 12-minute crazy thing? Or could you sort of describe that?
Yeah. No, Joe is great at describing action. His writing style is very tense, very terse, very, it keeps you turning the page. It's very entertaining to read. And he wrote the action sequence speaking of in the middle of the film that we turned into this, almost 12-minute oneer. That's not on the page. What was on the page was a sequence that when you read it, was about a 5 to 7 minute read. But when it read like as big as any James Bond or Jason Bourne chase. And I was kind of like, this is an action, designer's dream, but we don't have those kind of resources. And kind of the whole point for me directing this thing is to get to direct the action and the drama. So if I take the biggest action piece in the movie and give it to somebody else, it's not my action. It's not my, my voice. And so I was like, how do I do this? And looking at it, it's probably, in my estimation, when I look at it, just kind of from the past experiences I've had, probably 6 to 7 days of main unit and 3 weeks of second unit. It's a lot of time, to achieve what's on the page. And we just didn't have that. We didn't, we had a shorter schedule and we had to just make it work. And so I was like, how can we do all of that where we can fit it in our schedule, tell all these different stories? Because on the page you followed, there's 3 different points of view. You had Chris and the kid, and you had Saju, who played by Randeep Hooda, who's chasing them, and then you had the police. So you got 3 different stories you have to weave in and out. And through intercutting, Joe did that. And so I was like, how do we tell all these stories at once and yet keep it with main unit and do something different? Because I don't want to do it, my first movie, I don't want to do a car chase and a bunch of fight stuff where, 1, I'm not even getting to shoot it. 2, it's like we don't have the money and resources to make it as good as Bond and Bourne. It'll come out kind of like, oh, they tried, yeah, good job. So how do we make it unique? And then I was like, I always mentioned to Joe that I wanted to shoot it in kind of a, at least when we were in DACA, there was a differentiation between when we're with the world of, Ovi and the gangsters. It's very smooth. That's their world. It's very kind of polished. But then when we go into DACA, it's like a documentary type film, kind of drama, where it's just things are happening in real time. Camera's a little more just reactionary. It's handheld. So just feel that unsteadiness of that environment. And so with that in mind, I was like, when we get here, what if we were to do, now hear me out now, if we're to do this as one shot where we follow Rick through the extraction in real time so people get to feel what it's like to go on this journey with him. And he's like, nah, I don't like it. And I was like, let me I'll try to write it and explain it to you. He's like, well, we have to it was nothing about, like a stylistic versus ego or whatever. It has to serve the story. He's like, I don't want it just to be some cool thing. What's the point of it? And I was like, well, here's the point is, again, to make people feel what they're feeling and put them in it real time. He's like, well, we have to make sure we can tell the story of Rake and the kid, Saju, and the cops. If you can figure that out, like, I'll hear it out. So I had to write and design this thing. And it was tough, because what you usually find is with those sequences, or like we did with Atomic Blonde, is you're sticking with one person. It's one person's point of view that you stay with for the whole time. And what I wanted to try to do and experiment with is leaving the hero at certain times and go off with someone else's story midstream. And so all of that was going through my mind. How do we make this interesting, unique, fit it into the time frame and a style that is unique to the movie? And that's what we came up with.
I think it's my last thing for you. There's 2 last things. 1, I was completely blown away by what Chad did with John Wick 3 and those dogs and the stunts that they pulled off. When you watch something like that, when the movie's over, do you sort of just like shake your head and say, fuck, man, I got to raise my game?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was actually a humorous, time, because we were both posting our movies in the same location, kind of the same time. He was a little ahead of me and we were just coming in. So he brought me in to see early cuts of the movie. And I remember watching it and just this sinking feeling in my stomach of like, yeah, nah, like he's still the master. I am definitely still the student. He's like, the bar is so high with him, and the design of action and the concepts and the world building. And like, that's, I don't know if that goal is ever attainable. Is the way I look at them and the work they've done. Chad Stahelski and Dave Leitch. But stuff there I leave the cinema, like I'm clapping during it. Like I'm smiling. I'm afterwards, I'm calling them, just being like, guys, you've outdone yourselves. This is amazing. And I love it. It's like for me, it's a friendly, competitive environment, because you're not, they're super supportive. Like Chad came and watched an early cut of my movie and gave me a lot of amazing notes. Like we're not out to, take down the other person or be like, aha, your movie sucked. Or we're excited about people doing well, because, we're all in the same game. We come from the same world of action people wanting to do action movies and tell stories. So it's very supportive. And yet there is a definite hint of competition, because, but it's healthy, because it pushes me to try to think of better things. And hopefully I can, when I do stuff, it pushes them to think of bigger and better things. And I think the end result is better, bigger, better films for the audiences. So everybody wins.
I mean, I look at the competition between the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and they each raised their game to cause these amazing pieces of music to be composed. And, I'm hoping that people look at John Wick 3 or Extraction and, they're like, I got to raise my game.
That would be amazing. And I'll tell you what, if anybody else, like you did, uses John Wick, any of John Wick's and Extraction in the same sentence, I will be, on cloud nine.
When I'm actually able to talk about the movie on Twitter, I am going to say, quote unquote, Extraction at times is Chris Hemsworth John Wick.
Love it. Well, I appreciate that very much. That's very high praise.
Do you know what you're doing next? Or are you sort of like in that zone of, let me see how Extraction does?
We're kind of in the zone. Yeah. See how the movie plays, see how it's, respond to it. And I'm writing, I got my writing partner and I are adapting a novel into a script, and we're because I want to keep telling stories, and I'm constantly reading scripts. My team sends me stuff almost daily, and I'm reading and digesting scripts, just trying to find the next story. And in times like these where you're not quite sure when the next job is gonna happen, who knows when we'll be able to go about business as usual. It's just trying to compile a bunch of possibilities and build up a compilation of potentials that you can say, hey, once we go, let's try to get these things off the ground and have stories that are going to push me as a director and hopefully entertain audiences around the world.
Hey, listen, man, I'm just going to say, I know you got to go. We're at the 4:00 mark. Like, we talked more than I expected. I just want to say sincerely, congrats on the movie. So happy to help you promote it on Collider. I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.